for, what I've been waiting for, because I recently beat Max Payne 3. We're going to go ahead with a Tom Towers oral review of Max Payne 3.
Well, before we do technically get into the review, though this is basically part of it, I want to make a public apology to James McCaffrey, as I believe in my oral review of Max Payne 2, I said that he was a technically poor voice actor who struggles with more normal sort of scripts, right?
Yeah, I think you said that. I thought that Sam Lake did the voice acting, though. No?
No? You thought Sam Lake did the voice acting in Max Payne 1 and 2?
Yeah.
Really?
I know that you said that his face was in it, and he did the writing for it. And somewhere along the line, I just got the impression that he was a one-man band doing the whole thing.
That would have been amazing, but sadly...
It's James McCaffrey, right?
Yeah, it's James McCaffrey, and here he works with a perfectly normal vanilla-style script and performs excellently. The only real issue with his performance is with those stupid calligraphy emphasis moments where they want him to overemphasize words or sound a bit more aggressive than normal. It really generally comes across as extremely forced, but that is as much a problem as with the script than him himself. So my apologies to James McCaffrey.
You talking about this game?
Yep, Max Payne 3.
Yeah, okay, yeah. It's the like the font selection where they use the tabloid style fonts, right? So as he's saying certain words, they'll come up on the screen.
I wouldn't say they're tabloid style. They're more graphic design style fonts.
Yeah, they kind of remind me like TMZ or National Enquirer type headline.
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
thing.
Well, that's the content of them, I would say. But
yep.
They kind of look like Supreme style. You know, Supreme, the fashion brand. Are you familiar with it?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I think they use type fonts along those sorts of lines, and Obey, etc.
Yep.
But anyway, so he puts in an excellent technical performance there, so I take back what I said in the previous podcast. Now, speaking of the writing, though, as we both know, the writing was one of the best parts in both Max Payne 1 and 2, for the simple fact that it was extremely ambitious. In the first game, he was copying noir prose, which you really almost never see in basically any video games. You very rarely see prosaic-style dialogue. And in the second one, it was a very serious attempt at doing a noir script and was done to a very good level. And here, I think the most ambitious thing you can say about the dialogue is that it attempts to not sound like it's shit. So it avoids any sort of ambition for the sake of not having any annoying, jarring lines in there. And it has basically no style to it. It's not written in a pulpy noirish style. And to make matters worse, it fails in its attempt to not sound like shit. Here is a line that is in the game, literally as it is, and it is some inner dialogue from Max Payne in his narration as is going along in the game. And what happens in the scene is some elevator doors open, and here's the line to accompany that. I saw the elevator doors were open. Now, in the first Max Payne, of course, they did do a lot of obvious descriptions of the environment, but it was prosaic dialogue, so it actually added to the atmosphere of the game. And given that the game was of a very low visual fidelity, it really did add to the atmosphere and just gave the game more feeling to it. Here, that's the sort of environmental descriptions you come across which add absolutely nothing. And they don't really focus on doing any one thing with the narration. So you're going to be going along, and 1 minute you're going to get some joke about painkillers. The next minute you're going to get some genius, amazing line about the environment like that. And the next you're going to get some inner turmoil of Max considering all the killing he's doing, or some social commentary line. So
do you think though that were they doing the kind of Bastion type narration where it was procedurally generated as opposed to scripted? So basically, whenever an event happens, maybe every fifth event they do the self narration.
Well, I hope it was procedurally generated, because I came across several narration lines that were actually repeated. So if it was scripted, that would just be incredibly lazy.
Yeah, they probably did do it procedurally then, and so it doesn't turn into a like a play-by-play sports type commentary. They probably randomized like how many of them to do. Otherwise, he'd be
Yeah.
The elevator doors opened. I really noticed that I needed to pee. I really should probably reload my gun.
Exactly.
And they just did some self-editing.
And it did
something that we're not accustomed to.
Not at all. We do these live, basically, and just throw them on air as they are.
We should probably just procedurally come up with some sort of procedurally edit the podcast. Just cut out random 3-minute segments.
Yeah, we should procedurally record it so we don't actually have to record it.
That's a good idea.
What we should do is we just walk around with microphones on the entire day and write some algorithm to randomly put together stuff we've said. I think that could work well.
I think it could work well. And then, I like it. All right.
Yep.
Now,
look out for that in the next big show, I'd say.
Did you say that you didn't like the writing? Now, is it that you don't like the writing or that you don't like that it's not noir?
It's both. And here's the thing about the writing. The narration, I think, it works when he's going on these long diatribes where he's complaining about his life, or when he's doing some Rockstar style social commentary. That's when it works, because we know what Rockstar's writing style is like. The best writing in their games is, of course, on the talk shows. It's not in the dialogue between the characters. It's not the scripts. It's when they can go on some long, detailed, amusing monologue, right?
Yeah.
So that's when it works. But they're not good at writing scripts. So when you're writing small snippets of dialogue as an inner monologue, you have to be good at writing small snippets of dialogue. And I don't think that they are good at that at all. So when he's going on these long diatribes, it's fine. But which is most of the time, he's saying random snippets of crap or doing some action one-liner, I don't think it works at all, because that's not what they're good at writing. And in their other games, you might hear a random one-liner, action one-liner here and there, but here you're constantly hearing these inner monologues, and they're not always long diatribes. So, like 30% or 40% of what is being said as we're playing, not even the cutscenes, is really intrusive and crap.
Yeah, but I mean, it's better for them to have the long diatribes, as you call them,
yep.
Be well written, and have the randomly, generated inner monologue moments be crap, as opposed to the other way around.
But it would be better if they didn't have the shorter ones in there, because they add absolutely nothing to the experience that I could tell. I don't think they added anything to the aesthetic of the writing or anything to the plot whatsoever. They felt like they were there just because they did that. That was there in the previous two Max Paynes.
We should probably say that at this point that this oral review will contain spoilers for Max Payne 3. So I'll just start one off right now.
And actually, this is the final Max Payne. So we've warned about spoilers for 3, but later on we'll be getting to some Max Payne 1 and 2 spoilers. That it is important to some of the areas where Rockstar really fucks up.
Yep. So perhaps if we give an example of one of the longer inner dialogues, or monologues, we'll call them, probably later in the game or around the middle of the game, where he's in the ghettos or the favelas or whatever they're called, and he goes to that whorehouse. So he's been stripped of his weapons at that point.
Yep.
And beaten up pretty bad. And he goes into that whorehouse, and he has probably basically a 30-second or 40-second segment where he's talking about this is where foreigners come and blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And I thought that was pretty, I found those to add to the game. Is that what you're talking about, the stuff that was better done?
Yeah, that's the stuff that was good.
Okay.
And my issue with them, though, is they fit neither in noir with the way they were presented. You can, of course, have that content in noir, but I don't think you can present it in the same way. And we'll get into why in a few moments. But the other issue is that doesn't fit whatsoever with Max Payne, because the way that Max Payne did any social commentary, which it didn't really at all, but if it was to do social commentary, how it would have done it was with the mythological references. So all the drug stuff in the original Max Payne was all using Norse mythology and Norse iconography and all that sort of stuff. The drug was called Valkyr, of course, where Valkyries are Viking angels, whatever, Norse angels that go and pick up people from the battlefield, all that sort of stuff. If you're presenting them just deadpan and as it is with no sort of covering, I don't think that fits whatsoever with Max Payne's overriding aesthetic. And in Max Payne 2, where you could say it had stuff about police corruption and all that sort of stuff, it was not presented as straight commentary on these issues. It was presented first and foremost as a pulpish conspiracy sort of story.
It was just a story device.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it's like the police are corrupt. It wasn't saying
the police are corrupt, what the fuck, the world is shit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't see why, the only reason they put that in there is because they're Rockstar. And they do this sort of thing elsewhere as well, and they don't even manage to make it fit with their own tropes. For example, in lots of Rockstar games, they've got stuff like television shows and blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. Here, they're copying the older Max Paynes where they might have had TV reports where they were done deadpan, except, of course, that they followed the events within the story. But otherwise, they were done deadpan. So you've got news reports about what's happening in the game, and they're done deadpan. But what's going along on the bottom of the screen, but Rockstar one-liner jokes about current events and all that sort of stuff. And it doesn't even work within their own tropes, because the two don't fit together at all. Because they both go against each other so much that they dilute each other to the point where they have no impact. And
I would agree with that, but let me just say, I don't think they're a tribute band. I mean, Rockstar is not being a tribute band and saying, hey, we're going to go out there and make a game and make everyone think that they're playing a Remedy game. They took the property, they took the Max Payne over, and I do think that they do have the right to make it a Rockstar game while retaining elements of the Remedy game that people enjoy. I do think it is their responsibility and totally acceptable for them to make this their own game. And I think they took a lot of care to make sure that they did keep enough elements of Remedy's original game in there. I
agree with you, but the thing is, I don't think they successfully integrate their style into the Max Payne universe, and they don't meld them together whatsoever. And the things that they choose to copy over from Max Payne make their additions worse, because they do not fit together. I think they would have been better to attempt to either make it a Max Payne pastiche 100%, or to move in a completely new direction, because I don't think they managed to meld the two elements together whatsoever. And like I said, I don't think this is them doing their own kitsch well at all, because the only successful thing that is synonymous with their style would be the inner monologues, I would say. And they're, once again, diluted to some degree by the fact that they have kept over Max Payne style narration, because even though they don't necessarily directly affect your enjoyment of the Rockstar style monologues, when you're listening to it, you can't help but meld them together, because they come thick and fast, both styles. So you start talking again and you think, oh shit, it's going to be another load of bullshit. So you're coming into it with bad expectations, even if it is then going to be a better monologue that is in the Rockstar style.
Speaking of the Rockstar style, what did you think was the Rockstar commentary? What was their overriding commentary? I have my own opinion, but I'd like to hear from you. What is it, the one singular thing that they were trying to say through Max Payne 3, if they were trying to make any sort of societal comment at all?
Well, I'm not sure. I have to think about it for a minute. The first thing I want to actually say is, I thought this came out after Spec Ops: The Line, but apparently it was released in the same year, and this is probably the closest game I've played to Spec Ops: The Line in a number of ways. We'll probably get into that later, but to answer your question, Let me think about that a little longer.
I'll just
You
go
go
ahead
first,
with what
you go
my
first.
theory was, and that was, and you're quite right about Spec Ops: The Line. It is similar in many ways. I'd start with probably the clear depiction of violence. I'm not going to say brutal violence. I mean, this was just a game that didn't pull any punches in terms of the depiction of violence.
Yep.
In terms of commentary, I would say there was two competing comments that they were trying to make. One I'm confused by, and that was the heavy-handed discussion of substance abuse.
Yep.
It seemed like at least every 7 minutes, Max Payne was complaining about being too drunk or being too sober.
Yep.
Which I just thought were really, really thin. And I didn't really understand what the point of that
I think that was carryover from the first game, and that's one of the things that really fucks up the noir presentation, because in Max Payne, the substance abuse was illustrated in, one, the mythology, and two, the TV shows and stuff. That was basically, symbolically, his substance abuse. So when he was going along, all the media he was seeing was basically illustrating his life in a very paranoid and irrational sort of way. Here, instead of doing something more nuanced like that, what they do is they've got this basically Kane and Lynch filter where whenever he's completely fucked up, you get artifacts on the screen and all that sort of thing, which is completely anti-noir and is just such a base and obvious way and boring way to present it.
Well, I'm not going to, again, hold too much against them for not sticking to
No, they shouldn't have stuck with it. I'm saying they shouldn't have attempted to do it, because there was no need for them to even include the theme, because they didn't really go anywhere with it.
Well, let's just say, I mean, this is neo-noir. It's not really noir. I mean, and so I would say that Max Payne is even, I'd say Max Payne is noir just because of some of the camera angle use, but this is neo-noir.
Yep.
And they're keeping the same, archetypes and themes, but they don't have to be, contained back to the, the pre-60s level of noir. So,
yep.
I thought it actually was somewhat humorous in a Rockstar kind of way that they did have him be addicted to painkillers, since we were the ones that were giving him painkillers all these years.
Yep.
And it would only make sense that he would become addicted to them. I'd say the other social commentary was basically just class distinction, or possibly the influence of Western culture on developing countries in Latin America. But you wouldn't, not necessarily Latin America, because you could apply it to pretty much anywhere else in the world. But beyond that, I think it was actually more of a comment on, class stratification, which is something that Rockstar does pretty much in every single one of their games, be it Bully, or the Grand Theft Auto games, and even Red Dead Redemption. And probably, speaking of Bully, it's useful to point out this was done by Rockstar Vancouver, whose other most notable game was Bully, and subsequent to the commercial failure of Max Payne 3, Rockstar Vancouver was shut down, and most of the talent was moved over to the Toronto office of Rockstar, just to keep our Rockstar lineage or genealogy clear.
The other theme,
so what do you... No, that was it.
Okay, the other theme I would say that was going on throughout it would be a comment on, suppose you could sort of call it a Brazilian new wave that happened in the mid or early 2000s with films like City of Gods, which in many ways romanticized favela life and the differences in class and presented what was in some ways a sentimental view of modern Brazilian culture, and was very much accepted and taken on in the West, because it pretty much fed into the whole Brazilian tourism thing that is still really popular today. And I think it was as much commentary on the stereotype of Brazil, and not so much Western, but also as well as Western's influence over Brazil, but Western interpretation of Brazilian culture. Because it was basically taking lots of stuff out of things like City of God, which once again, worked on class distinction and all that sort of stuff. But instead of either attempting to draw similarities between different classes, it very much attempted to emphasize the differences. And just little things along those lines. I think there was a lot of commentary on Brazilian media that has been popular here within the previous decade.
I think there's also a strange thing going on where basically everyone who was poor was depicted as being, better family people or better friends to each other. Anyone with any wealth was seen as being conniving and underhanded and cheating someone out of something else. There did seem to be some of this moralistic, rich people, they might have money, but they don't have good families, or they don't have good friends, or they don't have good times. And look at us poor common people. We're dancing in the streets, even though we have nothing. We're happier than you are, sort of thing.
That came across to me as possibly part of the commentary on media, but it could also be straight social commentary, easily. As I was saying, the thing is, it's not just the script that has issues. The overall story does as well. And we are going to have to get into some Max Payne 1 and 2 spoilers right about now. We'll probably have warnings in the time frame, so you can skip ahead a little of the way. But it never actually explained why Max Payne has fallen into this drug-induced stupor and depression that he was suffering through in the first and second game, considering that the second game finished with a reasonable amount of closure and hope, and with him moving on. Did I miss something in the story where this was explained?
Well, right from the start, he's drawn into this Latin American thing by a guy who finds him in a bar, and at that point, he's already basically an alcoholic, or is an alcoholic. He's drinking constantly, and on painkillers. So I don't, and it is kind of confusing because they do cut backwards and forwards from Latin America to the how on earth did I get into this situation, which I thought was a good way to break up and add variety to the levels. Jumping between what I remember I think was New Jersey and Sao Paulo. So it was confusing to I don't actually remember how he got back into the state where he was. They killed Marlena, was that her name?
Mona Sachs?
The love interest in the second game was killed. Was she killed at the end of the second game?
She was, but that was actually the event that led to closure within the entire canon, because she was involved in the murder of his wife and child.
Right, I remember that.
And that's, as far as I could tell, the only way they attempted to justify it was when he goes to the grave of his family before he's leaving for Sao Paulo. There's a small inner monologue where he says something along the lines of, he realizes now that the stuff with Mona Sachs was just grief. But that appears to be the only possible reasoning behind him falling into a life of drugs and alcohol again. There's a small problem with that, though.
Well, I was going to say, he leaves New Jersey because he kills the son of a mob boss. But at that point... But at that point, he's already in the drug-induced, alcohol-induced depression. And this is 9 years after Max Payne 2. And at that point, when he kills that guy, he was already completely drugged out of his gourd. So it seems that he may have just gone back to being depressed about having lost his family again. Which is... Who knows? Which is terrible justification in where they do it. And the only way they overtly attempt to make any comment is possibly the Mona Sachs thing. He says something along the lines of, he realizes now that the Mona Sachs interest was due to grief. The problem with that is, he realized that in the first game. In the second game. That happens within the story of the second game. That's not revelatory in any way now hearing it, and her death signaled the end of the entire saga, and was, of course, a sad moment, but also it allowed him to possibly consider moving on with his life, because everyone involved was dead, and he didn't really love her. It was just his reaction to his family dying. So
there's really no logical reason for him to be in this state, which makes the whole premise of the game somewhat hard to believe. And even worse is the way he's so easily strung along with the bullshit. Now, he is in a complete alcoholic stupor, so you expect him to be somewhat retarded. Okay, I accept that. But he's taken off by Marcelo, who, by the way, has one of the most dirty, awesome beards in any game ever. It is just incredible. He must never, ever wash it, and it is all the better for it. He's strung along by Passos, to go off to Sao Paulo. That's all well and good. He's pretty stupid. But later on in the story, we discover, of course, he's been betrayed by Passo, and it all began when they're on this boat, which is attacked by militants. And after the militants attack, he sees Passos and Marcelo loading a truck full of some sort of goods. This apparently doesn't ring any alarm bells for it.
Well, at this point, it was clear to me that from the moment he met Passos in the bar, that he was going to be in the classic noir, set up as a patsy for something, right?
Absolutely.
For whatever reason, they wanted a white American. This guy had already shown in the past that he was on the corrupt side. He's obviously got a substance abuse problem, and he was basically being, led around like a bull with a brass ring through its nose.
And that's one of the great noir things about the game.
Yep.
But
so he sees these guys packing these, quote, goods into a truck, doesn't think anything of it.
He literally does not bat a fucking eyelid. He walks up to them and says, "What do you think we should do now?" Or they ask him, "What do you think we should do now?" "Oh, we'll probably go and try and save the lady. Don't you think that's a good idea?" These two people then glance suspiciously at each other, consider it for a moment, then, "Oh yes, that's probably a good idea." And he lets the other guy drive off into the sunset. It's just so fucking stupid. I mean, the thing about noir is, if you're going to do that sort of noir story, you've surely got to do it with some sort of nuance. That level of stupidity could pass in a blockbuster action film, but I don't think it works in noir, because in noir, even though of course the guy might be the fall guy, etc., you've got to be able to wonder about, you've got to be going along looking for clues that might give the people away he's working for, and there's got to be more subtle so that you can believe he misses these things, even if he is a fucking idiot. I think that was just perhaps a little too much. And
I think that here's what's going on. Right? Like the main patsy in all noir games always miss it, because you want the reader to see that the guy is missing it. You know what I'm saying? You want the reader to feel smart, that they see that this guy is getting bamboozled, but he can't see that he's getting bamboozled, because otherwise the story ends there.
Absolutely.
Second of all, I think this plays in. I mean, throughout the whole game, Max Payne is constantly trying to save his wife by saving these female characters in this game, and so with him, constantly saying, we've got to save the family, we've got to save the mom, we've got to save the sister, the daughter, whatever she was, this was, I think, a very clear callback to his whole preoccupation with trying to save female characters,
which of course never actually existed in Max Payne 1 and 2.
Well, I mean, don't you think that was a driving force in Max Payne 2, where he was trying to save that woman?
But he was trying to save that woman because he thought he was in love with her.
That's exactly right.
But in Max Payne 3, I took that much more as being part of the whole American, him basically being a symbol of America's interaction with other countries, where he's basically going along white knighting constantly, and any interaction with women is suddenly extremely protective, which is not at all the case in Max Payne 1 and 2. In Max Payne 1, he kills a crack whore in self-defense, then he kills the old woman in cold-blooded murder out of revenge. In Max Payne 2, he kills his partner I wouldn't call that self-defense. I would call that, once again, cold-blooded murder. Even though she is threatening them both with a gun, he doesn't have any genuine reason to believe he's going to kill them, because even though Mona Sachs is telling him she's evil, she's going to kill us, he doesn't believe that to be the case. And that's one of the great things about the scene, is he kills her in cold blood, and then later on when he finds out, the fact that she was, of course, involved in the conspiracy provides no comfort, because he also knows in his heart of hearts that Mona Sachs was involved in the conspiracy. So it was basically entirely down to his own, what he wanted to do, as opposed to what he thought was morally right. Whereas in Max Payne 3, he's going around doing this as some jingoistic form of morality.
Mm. So you think he's being the world's policeman. I think he has some misplaced affection in his heart for trying to protect women because of the guilt of the first game, of losing his wife as a result of his actions or inactions. And he may have gone around killing people and all the rest of it. In Max Payne 1, I see him as being in a complete, haze,
yep.
or, post-traumatic stress type thing.
Yep, absolutely.
Where he can't be held responsible for what he's doing because he's just in a blind rage.
Yep.
In the second game, I think he's trying to replace his wife with Mona Sachs.
Yep.
So whatever happens, happens. And whether she dies, so that's two women now he's lost, right?
Yep.
Regardless of the circumstances or the characters they played. So I think with him trying to save the two women in this game, it was a callback to the two women that he had failed or let down or whatever in the earlier series. But more importantly,
but if that
back
is
to your
the case, there's no contextual reason for it to be like that within the game, because the events of the previous games are given cursory references or some vague attempt to justify him going off to, or rather, his state. I think if that was the case, they needed to actually integrate the story of the first two games further into the story here, because otherwise, the only overt justification for him going around doing this is symbolically as him world policing sort of stuff.
I think they could have been subtle, because they know that the Max Payne fan base is pretty loyal and would be able to pick up on it. But the other thing that is probably more likely is they look at the demographic of the people playing these games. Typically testosterone-charged young males. And if you told them that he had to go and save the father and the brother, that's far less interesting to them than saving some sexy broads. I mean, it could be just as clear as that as well.
Yeah, indeed. And just back to the point on the stupidity, that's, as you were saying, that is what you're meant to do in noir, but do you think they really handled that in a good way at all?
Well, I can't remember that specific instance, so I can't really speak to it.
Because that was basically the moment, the great moment it had been leading up to, where the whole plot was finally revealed to the audience, and I think it was just so mind-bogglingly stupid and obvious. It was nowhere near good enough. And like I said, it would have passed fine in an action film where those sorts of intricacies in the plot are not the point. But with it attempting to do it in a noir way, the point is the intricacies of the plot. And I think it needs to be done in a much less obvious, still obvious to the audience, but it can't be obvious to the character. And I think there is a distinction between those two tropes.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. This is an action game, however. I mean, are we perhaps penalizing this game for even trying to do something more than your typical blockbuster third-person shooter?
Well, I think we are, but I think if you do attempt to do more, you can't be led off simply on ambition. If you stuff it up, you've got to be happy to take the criticism.
Absolutely.
And
well said.
Before we move on from the noir, the one thing I'll say is, yes, it is post-noir, but I don't think it is successful at being post-noir. And I think there's two major problems with it being post-noir. Generally, post-noir films still follow in the aesthetic traditions of noir. And as far as I can tell from all the noir films I've seen, and I've probably only seen maybe 10 or 20, I've not seen a huge amount, and it would not be anywhere near 20, but let's say around 10. The prevailing aesthetic in noir, I would basically describe noir as Americans' version of neo-realism. And the reason for that is the prevailing aesthetic in noir, it's not even Gothic. It's not Gothic themes or Venetian blinds and shadows. What it basically is a naturalistic filming style, first and foremost. And that means because they were filmed in black and white, and at that time, lighting was very different. And you had to use different styles of lighting due to different film exposures and all that sort of stuff. You couldn't film outside in the nighttime without added lighting and all that sort of stuff. So the result was you got extremely deep and dark shadows, which resulted in a Gothic aesthetic. But I would call it a result of the filming techniques rather than necessarily a deliberate thing until later on in noir, when the style became much more deliberate. And secondly, a huge amount of noir wasn't just neorealism in filming techniques, but also quite literally in the actors. Lots and lots of noir films did not use actors but used non-actors to play roles. And also another huge part of noir was filming on location. And a lot of noir grew out of early docudramas, which were absolutely noir films. So a huge amount of noir, including not noir films that were docudramas, were filmed on location with no actors. So if a noir scene was set in a petrol station, they would film it in a petrol station with the guy that worked in there in the petrol station. If it was filmed in a jail, they would film it in a jail, and the people in there would be the jail guards and so on and so forth. I think only later on did noir begin to become a much more limited thing in the vein of stuff like the Maltese Falcon and these more sorts of complicated plots and all that sort of stuff. But they still continued on using, compared to blockbuster films at the time, much more naturalistic filming techniques and lighting, and often also filmed on location as opposed to filming on elaborate sets. But there are, of course, exceptions to that. So to me, the prevailing noir aesthetic is naturalistic filming and naturalistic cinematography, whether that means filming on location or whatnot, etc. And I could be completely wrong, but that's just based on the noir films that I've seen, and I think that's the only way you can refer to what is referred to as noir films, because it is a huge breadth of noir films that don't necessarily share any sort of thematic similarities or plot similarities. I think that's the only way you can possibly define noir, and I think we've lost that recently. I think noir has now simply come to mean films like The Maltese Falcon and films in that sort of vein.
Yep. I would say that when you're looking at neo-noir, you're basically looking at common archetypes and themes. So, for example, the archetype that I see is that you have someone involved in a complicated, convoluted mess of a plot, and you can see everything that's going on, but this poor character only has one view of it, and that's his view. And just the constant flipping of that in terms of maybe after the first 30 minutes you think you know what's going on, but by the end of the 60-minute mark you find out that you're actually wrong and you're just as much of a patsy as the guy you thought was stupid. And then by the end of a 90-minute thing it's flipped over again, and you may have been tipped off at about minute 85. Oh my God, it's going to flip again, sort of thing. So that's kind of what I think of noir. And I would even go as far as saying like a movie like The Usual Suspects would be a good example of a neo-noir type film. Again, very naturalistic photography and acting. But it's but it's not, again, The Maltese Falcon. It's not extreme low angle shots through Venetian blinds and blah blah blah, right?
And the only thing with that, do you not think that's slightly, perhaps, as far as the themes and plot structure, slightly too limited, because that would also fit into a lot of thrillers and mysteries and detective?
Well, it also has to be crime related. I think it can't be a war film, it can't be a romance, it can't be a comedy or something like that. But that's basically like how I see Max Payne as being.
Yep.
And if you were to tell me, you have to make a neo-noir game, I can't really think of a much better setting, apart, of course, from, Yakuza type setting or Hong Kong, Jackie Chan style.
Yep.
Not Jackie Chan, but John Woo style rather. Jackie Chan's not really a noir actor, or an actor, but I think you couldn't go much better than the settings that they used, which was New Jersey and Sao Paulo.
Yep, indeed.
They're just wonderfully vibrant places. Maybe Cuba, but let's face it. From our perspective, that's essentially the same thing, right?
Yep, indeed. But I think the settings were excellent choices. But I don't think they managed to pull off a neo-noir aesthetic, because the overriding aesthetic was basically the calligraphy and the Kane and Lynch filters, which are basically anti-noir because they're the opposite to naturalistic, and all the noir stuff was very basic referencing, apart from, of course, the betrayal plot, but the other sort of noir stuff they stuck in there was really obvious and dull references to noir. They even had some fucking Venetian blind shadows in there.
Yeah, it was jarring.
And I think if you're doing neo-noir and you stick Venetian blinds, and you're going to get laughed at by neo-noir aficionados. Yeah,
it's basically a hodgepodge of concepts, really.
Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, I liked the aesthetic of it, but really, whenever they were in Brazil, it looked like any number of modern hip-hop music videos. You know what I'm saying? With all the on both sides of it.
I think that was the point, though.
Yeah.
And I don't think the favelas were quite like that.
Yeah, that was more of a Tejano-style music video.
Yeah, exactly. I think the favela parts, they kind of missed an opportunity there. I think would it not have been, especially given Rockstar's penchant for loving to do social commentary, if they'd done the Hoboken section differently, instead of having it play out within the insides of the buildings and then on the roofs, if that had played out in the same manner as the favelas, so basically street battles, I think that would have been quite an interesting juxtaposition where they're comparing American slums. Well, I suppose they probably should have gone with the Bronx or something. I don't know. Is Hoboken a slum?
No,
but
no.
If they had mapped, so that wouldn't have worked. But if they had chosen something like say choose Compton, but they've already done Compton, so choose the Bronx or something and compare that with the favela. But I suppose I'd say they did Hoboken, of course, because the juxtaposition wasn't with the low class gangsters in favela. The comparison was with the American mafia and the Brazilian government / police and organized crime. So they were still doing the same juxtaposition I was saying.
Before we move off the theme of noir, I mean, the 800-pound gorilla in a room is another Rockstar game that somehow touched on the noir thing called L.A. Noire.
I did.
Now, you played this game.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, I think that would inform our conversation a lot better if you have the opportunity to play that. It's available on PC, right?
Yep.
Obviously.
Yeah, I've got it on Steam.
Oh, you do have it. Okay, good. Yeah, because I think that would go a long way, even though it was done, obviously, by a completely different team.
Yep.
By Bondi.
Did Dan Houser still write it, or was it written by someone at Team Bondi?
No, the guy in charge, the Aussie guy, Brandon, whatever his name is, was
the
in
evil
charge
dude.
of it. Yeah, the quote evil dude, who single-handedly destroyed the Australian video game development
Absolutely.
scene. Apparently.
Absolutely.
It wasn't the tax benefits being taken away or anything like that.
No. It wasn't the fact that the video game industry was already dead by that point, and he just happened to be the only company left that could make a large game.
Yeah.
It wasn't that he was the last, it was that he destroyed everyone about 5 years earlier.
It's probably would it be the first and last AAA game made by an Australian studio?
It wouldn't be the first.
Which would that be? why you think about that. But
Well,
but in any case,
Freedom
for the
Force,
listeners,
I would call AAA. That's middle budget, but that is a top-class game. And Bioshock, they had a reasonable amount of input on, I believe.
yeah,
But I wouldn't call that Australian. But Freedom Force was Australian developed. Looking back further, my mind is currently blank, but there's actually quite a few larger Australian developed games. Shadowrun, wasn't that Australian?
I don't know.
I think that's
not a AAA game.
No, it was a big title.
What's that one with the Tasmanian Devil in it?
Ty the Tasmanian Devil.
Yeah, you go. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger.
You wouldn't call that AAA either, I would say.
It's a fun game, though.
Yeah.
You should totally try that game.
I played the demo.
I have it for the GameCube, and it really is an Australian game. It's a game I'd recommend for any young Australian person with a GameCube.
What were you going to say about L.A. Noire, if you can say it without spoilers anyway?
Just quickly for our listeners, I think obviously L.A. Noire taps into the noir themes perfectly in everything that we've discussed. Not neo-noir, but classical noir. And, it is interesting that here we are, essentially giving criticism to Rockstar for the lack of thematic consistency when they had made this other critically acclaimed game, which is entirely consistent.
Yeah.
But as we've discussed, completely different development studios. So, onward and upward.
I think the main problem would probably be Dan Houser, because and I still need to play Red Dead Redemption, etc., but I enjoy his writing, but I think there's certain things that he is good at, and there's certain things that he's really not good at.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's the sort of writer that you would want to come in and pen a noir story, or even a neo-noir story. The last thing I want to say before we do move on to the gameplay is another thing that I don't think they should have brought across. And as I said, I'm all for them putting forth their own interpretation of Max Payne. And I think they should have done that much more aggressively than they did. And I think the greatest symbol of that is Baseball Bat Boy, which you probably have no experience of, given that you didn't use the television in the previous games. But Baseball Bat Boy was this cartoon character that you could come across. There were ads everywhere for him, so you probably did come across him. But there were also little snippets of his cartoon that were basically slideshows with narration and voice acting. And they mirrored the story, and the main appeal of them was that they were these completely hokey, random side things that illustrated Max's either burning rage in the first game or extreme paranoia in the second, but were these completely side, disposable, funny things that were completely pointless and were deliberately hokey and low budget, and obviously so. In Max Payne 3, they are fully animated short cartoons, which is, of course, what Rockstar likes to do. They've got those in Grand Theft Auto 4, but without the hokiness.
And Red Dead Redemption.
Yep. They've got cartoons in Red Dead Redemption. How does that work?
Well, it'd be a spoiler, so.
Okay, so Red Dead Redemption isn't actually set in the 1800s.
Yes, it is.
Then it can't have cartoons.
Hmm.
Well, they could if it's the late 1800s, actually, so.
Yeah, it is. It's actually the early 1900s.
Okay, then that's fine. That's fine.
The whole thing about Red Dead is the handing over from one generation to the next.
Yep.
Entering the technological age.
Okay, then I've
but I don't want to say.
So here, though, they sort of follow along in the story, because it's about Baseball Bat Boy being turned into an old man, which I think happened at the end of Max Payne 2. I can't remember exactly. But, so, Max Payne in this game is an old, middle-aged fart, basically. So it vaguely mirrors the story, but adds absolutely nothing to it, because it mirrors the story, but to no point. And the fact that it is a fully fledged cartoon, it might be amusing, but what the fuck is the point of sticking in a fully fledged cartoon unless it is a Rockstar game where they're attempting to do some sort of full parody of popular culture? And that kind of goes against me saying, well, they should get their own identity, but they're doing their own identity by taking something that doesn't work when presented that way from the previous game, so they're not really breaking away from the previous game, So to me, it's a really poor way to attempt to forge their own identity. And I think, aesthetically, the major problem with this game is that they attempted to pay way too much respect to the first two Max Payne games. And so on the one hand, I can respect that because they clearly went into this with a lot of love for the original IP, right? Clearly they thought Max Payne was awesome and they wanted to do an awesome Max Payne game. But at the same time, they thought, we want to do our own thing. But I think it was to their detriment that they paid so much respect to the first two Max Payne titles. And I think that's possibly the best, most obvious illustration of that.
Yeah, they kind of, but they are damned if they do, damned if they don't, right?
Yeah, well...
In a very difficult position.
Yeah, well, I personally wouldn't have shitted on them if they'd done their own thing to a good degree and weren't hampered by attempting to copy the first, or if they had pastiched the first two well. I think...
What if they... Yeah, exactly. What if they just come out with a up-resed version of Max Payne 2, just a new tale 2 years after the last game?
I would have been fine with that.
Yeah, and now what if they had just gone the other direction and made a solid third-person shooter, and the only thing they carried over was Max talking to himself and bullet time?
I would have been fine with that too, if it was well done. Absolutely.
Military shooter set in the Middle East.
Why not? That actually could be brilliant. You've got this, and it's easy in the army.
Yes,
okay.
ex-cop. He's joined the army.
He's joined the army. Some local recruiter went down to Hoboken, found him in a bar, this old man addicted to painkillers, and thought, that's military material. And he's not in the army, he's a Marine, okay? He's in the Marine Corps.
No, you got it wrong, I'm sorry. What happened is, after Mona Sachs died, he decided he needed a clean break from Hoboken and New Jersey, and the police force, and the mafia. So he moves to California. And while in California, in San Diego, he's getting back in shape. He decides instead of joining the police force, he's going to join the Marines. And from there, he becomes a Marine out of Camp Pendleton in San Diego. And he gets deployed after 9/11. They can recreate the planes going into the towers and his reaction to it. And that was New York. That was his city. And then he goes to Afghanistan.
Fucking arrows for this shit.
Yeah, he's going to Afghanistan. Where he falls in love with a burqa-wearing lady. And then the only other thing is, now it's basically a third-person shooter, much like Spec Ops: The Line. He's talking to himself, but he has bullet time. And occasional flashbacks to New Jersey.
That sounds...
And then he comes out of the flashbacks and realizes that he just laid waste to a house full of civilians.
I think that would actually be awesome. Imagine
Max
Rockstar doing that with their... sticking a lot of monologue, and they can have, he can be reading on the internet all the newspaper reporting, all the media about the war that's going on. I think that would be actually an awesome Rockstar game.
You could jack tanks.
Exactly. Drive over slums, and he can somehow end. Here's how it ends. Okay, so we're going with your opening premise, but he ends up somehow in Israel and Palestine, and he's working for originally Palestine, going around in these slums they've set up, in a tank, mowing down...
Throwing rocks.
Mowing down the farming lands and also the Palestinian slums. And
settlements.
And after falling in love with the Afghanistani woman who he killed in his massive rampage...
Unfortunately.
He then falls in love with some Palestinian woman, and it's the whole thing all over again. Or perhaps that could be the sequel, but I think we're onto something here.
I think we are too. Max Payne 4.
And I want to say one good thing about this, I think, actually. I very much enjoyed this Max Payne character. I thought they were a very amusing American cliche and a parody of certain American stereotypes. His interaction with the random missionary he runs into was also hilarious. I very much enjoyed him as a character, and I think the character deserves a lot of credit, as it was very much suited to the setting and very enjoyable. Did you
Max
enjoy
Payne.
it? Yeah, Max Payne.
Oh yeah, I thought it was a really good character.
And
I would love to see him in other settings. I really
absolutely.
would.
And
Yeah.
there was one major flaw though with him. He's this massively sweating, and the game's got this fucking brilliant sweat effects, which I was disappointed they didn't use more often. But he looks so dingy and dirty when he's sweating, and he's wearing this stained singlet he's shaved his fucking head off, but he's got stubble on his head, and a disgusting beard. That's all. So, awesomely disgusting character. Worse than Bruce Willis at his worst in Die Hard, which they were clearly greatly inspired by. Small problem. He's got no armpit hair. Now, are you telling me this character is going to shave his fucking armpits? And it's not as if lots of men don't have armpit hair. Let's be honest. Lots of men can't grow beards. It's a sad fact, but a fact, all the same. But he's got a large amount of hair on his forearms. I don't think he's got any problem growing hair. He's got no fucking armpit hair. What is going on?
He's got a pretty good beard, too,
exactly.
Right? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the Rage engine doesn't have something for underarm.
Well, I mean, to be honest, they've got his beard, and they've got stubble, or at other times his hair. So that's already much more hair than you see in any other game. So probably they couldn't render the armpit hair, and they thought, well, you don't get to stay under his armpits for 90% of the game. We'll have to sacrifice it.
I think that this is probably something that's overlooked in many games. You've recently started Saints Row 2 with the character creator, and you can do anything with that character creator. But the one thing you can't do is underarm hair. Imagine if you could control the amount of hair under the arm.
Can you not even do that in 3 and 4?
No. In fact, I believe that in 3 they have stepped back the customization.
So can you give women beard?
Yes.
That's okay.
Yes.
But, that would be, if you could control full body hair, that would be, imagine, you could have people with like 2 meter long armpit hair trailing behind them, massive curly pubic hair sticking out of their low trousers, gangster trousers, pulled down to the top of their dick, and there's this massive tuft of pubic hair. I think that would be awesome. That would be fucking amazing.
For something else, too, I just think in Max Payne 4, I would love it to start with him being a clerk in a rental car agency. Like, in a really bad-fitting uniform. Like, having to write up paperwork. And
it turns out the guy that recruited him into the used car business is actually a criminal.
A rental car.
Yeah, a rental car criminal. And the cars they're not stolen cars, they're cars used in drive-by shootings or drug running, and this is how they get rid of them.
No. What they are, right? These are cars that insurance companies have written off as being unsafe, and they're supposed to go to the wrecker. But instead of going to the wrecker, they go to this guy who gives them some superficial repairs and then sells them to this rental car company.
And so he's responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of civilian motorists.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Max Payne decides to start looking into this. Unfortunately, he chooses one of the cars that is not roadworthy.
This is how he finds out. He's with his new wife.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, well, my car's broken down. And
he's on his honeymoon, and he says, okay, well, no need for you to rent a car from somewhere else. Take our top-of-the-line minivan. Yep.
And his wife kills in the crash, and he blames himself.
Airbag doesn't deploy.
Yeah, he blames himself, but and the seatbelt breaks, and so the autopsy report, the coroner says she was killed because she wasn't wearing a seatbelt, but he knows this is bullshit, and everyone's like, well, it's her fault she's dead. They tell him to get over it.
No. What happens is just days before the wedding, he takes out a massive insurance policy.
Yep.
On her.
Yep.
And so when she dies in the honeymoon, the family starts to make accusations about this. It seems that the seatbelt's been tampered with, but it hasn't been tampered with. It's just because it was a written-off car,
Yep.
And so now the police are after him for the murder of his wife.
And this all happened in Australia.
In Australia, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think once again we need to get into writing for Rockstar.
That's Max Payne 5. That's after he's come back from Afghanistan. We can kill off wives like three a game,
Yeah.
no problem. Yeah. Well, probably enough on the theme and the aesthetic and the writing and everything like that. What did you think about the audio-visual components of the game beyond the sweat mechanic and the hair physics?
Well, as you probably know, the PC version has a 29 gigabyte download size because they actually bothered to give you the option of playing the game with high-res textures for everything. And I was skeptical of it when I first started playing the game because you go up to a texture and it still looks pretty shit, as it does in, every single game ever created, including in this HD era. But as I continued playing along and got to see a bit more of it, and specifically larger areas, it makes a huge difference because what it basically changes is not so much that textures look better when you're close up to them, but in most games, where there's something far away from you that you cannot get close to, or even if there is something far away that you can get reasonably close to, but not that close, what they do is they make it low res and poorly rendered, right?
Right.
Here, everything is of the same high quality of visual fidelity, so even if something's like 2 kilometers away, or maybe not that far, but say there's a wall 1 kilometer away, the textures on that are going to look as good as the textures that are near you, not including effects like occlusion or depth of field, etc. So it actually makes the game look so consistent in its visuals and just makes a huge difference to the graphics so that they look absolutely exceptional. And obviously it's not as technically advanced as something like Tomb Raider, but to me it looks as good as games in the vein of Tomb Raider, not because it is advanced, but because everything looks as good. Whereas in Tomb Raider, lots looks way better than anything in Max Payne 3, but there's also some stuff that does look really shit. Here, there's basically nothing except for, of course, the posters you come across. So, the 29 gigabytes is worth it if you can manage to run it at those settings. And the difference between running on high-res textures and normal is something like 400 or 300 gigabytes on your video card. So it is a huge difference in graphical processing power. So you might not be able to do that even if you've got 29 gigabytes to spare. But if you can, it is absolutely worth it.
So good for them, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
this bodes well for the PC version of Grand Theft Auto 5. It did come on 4 DVDs for PC, 3 for the 360, and then 1 Blu-ray for the PlayStation 4. I played the 360 version. I thought it looked incredible. I had no problem with it whatsoever.
Same here. It looks excellent. And as I said, I did try it with the textures lower. The difference is really only just the consistency in fidelity. So even on consoles, it should look absolutely excellent. Now, the sound I also wanted to mention. I thought the soundtrack was really, really good as well. And when I saw that Health did it, I thought, okay, I know Health. They're that Witch House band, aren't they? I was thinking of a different band. They're far away from Witch House, which is a good thing for basically everyone except me. I assume you've not heard of Witch House.
That's correct.
Yeah, Witch House is basically a continuation or a mixture of glitchy sort of poor quality, low fidelity electronic music and hip hop beats, and it bursts onto the scene. Everyone exploded loving it. Then 5 seconds later, they were like, "Okay, this is actually really fucking shit. What the hell were we thinking about?" So everyone hates it except for me. So it's a good thing that it wasn't the band that I was thinking of that made this. Though Health does have some similarities to Witch House, but I think they did a pretty excellent job with the soundtrack. Though looking at the credits, they only made 2 songs. But I thought that the music was an excellent mix of bombastic sort of rock tracks for the action scenes, and more importantly, when you were in Brazil, you got a lot of really great sort of percussive drums that you might associate with Brazilian music and all that sort of stuff. I thought it was really good, and I really enjoy it when action games do not just use orchestral scores, and it was the icing on the cake that they altered the style of music for the setting. I thought it was a brilliant soundtrack.
I think they also did your favorite thing where, if someone was in the other room, they'd grow quieter, or if you walked out of the nightclub, you'd hear the music,
Yeah, well,
lower
everyone
in volume.
does that now. That's standard.
Yeah. That's good.
So, did you enjoy the music as much?
I really did. I liked every aspect of the audio-visual presentation.
Yeah.
There was nothing to distract me. There was no time where I went, or that looks like crap, or, any performance slowdowns or anything like it. And I really did like the audio. I liked the voice acting.
My only problem with the voice acting was the script was not tailored towards the emphasis. But other than that, I enjoyed the voice acting too.
Yeah, the Brazilian characters I thought were well portrayed in their appearance and their, accents. They didn't go over the top.
What was great about that was they also actually used voice actors or just random people from Sao Paulo to do the Sao Paulo voice acting, which is extremely good because you got Sao Paulo accents, and I'm not particularly familiar with Sao Paulo accents, but from my knowledge of football, the difference between a Sao Paulo accent and elsewhere in Brazil is the voices are much less, they don't go as high-pitched and sort of musical. So Brazilians are like, right? That's very much Brazilian Portuguese. In Sao Paulo, that's a little more subtle, which I thought came across excellently. When I was playing it first, I thought, shouldn't this be a little more over the top? Then I realized it's mostly in Sao Paulo, so I thought that was an excellent use of voice acting and a great way to... Localization isn't the correct term, but a great way to present the voice acting.
Yeah, authenticate or something like that is... It has good provenance, and it does speak to Rockstar's thoughtfulness to some aspects of their craft.
Yeah.
And I know they spend a lot of time down there, getting visuals and the light right and everything else.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, thumbs up for me. I thought it looked great.
Excellent. Now, onto the gameplay, which you thought we were maybe a bit harsh in our descriptions of the aesthetic. Well, wait until we get to the gameplay. Now, I'm going to begin with the mechanics, because the mechanics are just absolutely incredible. And the only game that is possibly better, the only third-person shooter that I've played that I think has better mechanics or equal mechanics, and it's hard to compare because Vanquish, which is the game I'm talking about, is a console game, so I played with dual analog. So I'm going to have to give Vanquish the nod because I played it on consoles with dual analog, and I thought the mechanics were equal to Max Payne, which I'm playing on PC with mouse aiming. And why are the mechanics so excellent? The first thing that is just perfect about the mechanics is once you've turned auto aim off, the aiming is just absolute perfection. And of course, you think this applies to all games with mice controls, but it doesn't. I can twitch headshot people in this game with no problem whatsoever, which is even more impressive because it's in third person. Max's character never gets in the way of where I'm aiming. I never feel like the perspective is off because it's in third person. I've got absolutely no problems with aiming. The cover is perfectly responsive. It's a little bit slow coming in and out of cover, but that fits the weight of his movement, which is very heavy, which feels great when you're moving around, and it gives emphasis to your jumping because the movement is so heavy and slow. There's a great sense to the recoil of the guns. You can't just hold down, shoot. You've got to master the recoil so that you're shooting a burst and all that sort of stuff, which gives the shooting an added layer of skill that might be lacking, but still feels really accurate and responsive and predictable. And when you're jumping, once again, Max's body never gets in the way when you're in bullet time and you're aiming. And just the controls are perfect. And you never accidentally stick to cover or have troubles with the cover whatsoever. And when you're running towards cover, you slide towards it a bit, so it's a slight sliding mechanic. And I just thought everything about the controls were absolutely perfect, and there was nothing wrong with them. And the damage modeling is great too. When you shoot someone in the leg, they sort of fall over and they stumble. You shoot someone in the head, they're dead. All that sort of good stuff. It is just fucking excellent. And the gore is just brilliant. There's awesome entry point wounds, exit point wounds. I thought, combined with the slow motion, the spectacle of the combat was just absolutely awesome. Equal to any game that has, any third-person shooter rather, that I have played.
And in the cutscenes, they have shock kills.
Yeah.
And things like that. That was good.
Yep.
I think this is actually something that is very admirable, in that Max Payne is known for its, run and gun kind of shooting style,
Yep.
And using bullet time as opposed to cover. But Rockstar did introduce cover to Max Payne 3 for the first time in this game.
Yep.
But they didn't take away that added to the realism.
Absolutely.
Because it is a more realistic game in a realistic setting,
Yep.
just by virtue of the graphics than Max Payne 1 and 2.
Yep.
So adding cover was a nod to that realism, but it doesn't get in the way. You don't, in the manner that you've already described.
And the cover actually adds to it, because what the cover basically does, and it's something that is a major issue with the gameplay that we'll be getting into later, is the cover adds a sense of rhythm to it, because you're never using the cover just to sit behind it and wait to shoot people in the head when they pop out. And
you can't, because
and that's
I
it takes so long to get out of cover.
Yeah.
So what you're then using the cover is basically just to catch your breath once you've been jumping around and all that sort of stuff. And so it adds a little bit of rhythm to it without taking away from the very fast-paced action. It's excellent use of cover. And another thing that I just love that I can't think of, I'm sure there are third-person shooters, but my mind is going blank. I can't think of any other third-person shooters that allow you to go prone. And it adds so much to it, especially one of the most awesome things to do is you do a sideways jump and you kill like 50% or 75% of the people, and you end up on the ground, lying on your back, as you logically would, rather than just jumping up to your feet. You can continue shooting when you're lying down. And when you're lying down, the enemies become hugely inaccurate. So it's just awesome. You can use to your advantage. Jump aggressively into an environment with a lot of enemies, shoot most of them, then pick off the remaining few while you're still on the ground. I think that is just fucking awesome.
Yeah, they've done a really good job here of just making a game a third-person game, and they don't prevent you from doing all the things that a third-person game would usually prevent you from doing.
And
the enemy AI also is very good in that they force you not to use the cover as a crutch.
Yep.
Because if you stop and wait for too long, the enemies they will come and get you. So they kind of force you to play it in the traditional Max Payne style of running and gunning, which I thought was very cleverly done.
The only untraditional thing in regards of Max Payne 2 and 1, would be that they made bullet time, not unlimited, but you can spam jump as much as you want, which is against what they did in Max Payne, and also the bullet time is much more powerful in Max Payne 3, but I don't think that's an issue at all. I think that is what is so enjoyable about it. Now, the only issue I would have with the mechanics is two things. I think a melee attack would have been greatly beneficial. Just in a couple of moments, bear in mind I was playing on hard, there are a couple of moments where I ended up out of ammo, and there was maybe a couple of enemies left, and it would have been nice to be able to run over and beat them in the face or something. And I don't think it would have altered the gameplay that much if they still made it really limited so that enemies didn't stop shooting at you while you were meleeing someone or something, which they do in a lot of third-person games. I think that could have worked. And the other thing that I thought was lacking, but might have been a bit of an issue, is grenades. There are no grenades in the single player, even though there are in multiplayer, which feels a little odd, but I think that could have been made cover act too much as a crutch, because you could then just spam grenades. So
I think it's a little too paramilitary for Max Payne too.
Except that the enemies have grenades.
Yeah, but you're not the enemy. You're not a member of the paramilitary.
You are using their weapons. You scavenge their weapons, so it makes sense within the plot narrative for you to steal any leftover grenades.
What I'd say is this: if you're an ex-New York cop and you're now a bodyguard, I mean, just because you see a grenade doesn't make you a grenade expert, and you'd probably be hesitant to start picking up tools that you're not comfortable with using, and just start drilling them
previous
around.
Two games.
Did he?
Yep.
That's stupid.
There were Molotov cocktails and grenades in them both.
You said you played on hard. How did you find the difficulty?
Well, this is another thing similar to Vanquish. And they deserve a huge amount of respect for this. They made the game, the hard mode, actually hard, which is to say, it's basically at least very hard on other games. If you are playing badly at all, you are instantly dead. If you spend a few seconds idle, even behind cover, if you're not perfect in cover, you are dead. So the whole time, no matter the fight, even if you're against just a few people, you have to be playing well. And once you learn to play well, I think what is so awesome about it is, it's not just that you spam bullet time to instant win, because later on, you can get in a lot of trouble doing that because you can get stuck on the ground. So you've actually got to figure out when you want to be able to strafe really aggressively and kill people and when you want to spam bullet time. So they made hard extremely challenging, and they deserve a huge amount of credit for that. I always automatically, to me, hard mode needs to be hard, and if you make hard mode hard, you deserve a huge amount of credit. Unless you do it through cheap manners, that is. Unless you're doing it through some sort of cheap way, but they don't here. So hard mode deserves a lot of credit. This is in Vanquish. And there's one other thing I want to talk about with Vanquish, is there's a huge amount of influence in the way that the game plays from Vanquish, I believe anyway. And the best illustration of this is when you've got a painkiller in Max Payne 3 and you die, what happens is you automatically go into bullet time, and if you kill the person that shot you, then you get to continue playing, which is 100% the bullet time mechanic from Vanquish, where in Vanquish, if you're about to die, the game automatically goes into bullet time to give you a chance to kill everyone and get to cover or whatever.
Second chance kill or something.
Exactly.
Bullet, yeah. Yeah, that's a great. I love that. I wish every game had that.
Yeah. So that's
particularly online multiplayer.
Oh yeah, that could work on the multiplayer on Max Payne 3. I haven't had a chance to die with a painkiller, but there is still bullet time in it. So they did that at least. And I will just say quickly on the multiplayer, due to the excellence of the mechanics, the multiplayer is really, really enjoyable. It's let down by the level design, which is just incredibly boring, but it's not bad level design, it's just really boring. Now, that's basically all I can say about the multiplayer. So, that's everything good about the single player, all the great things about the single player. Now, it has, unfortunately, a really, really major issue. Now, this has been generally described in the games press and amongst fans of the game as the game being too long, right? So
it's funny. I was about to bring this up. I played it on normal, and in normal it was quite a hard game.
Yep.
So that jives with what you're saying. If you found hard to be hard, and I found normal to be hard, then that fits. Also, I just want to bring this one point that also aids the difficulty of the game. I really respect the fact that they gave you every single gameplay option in the settings.
Absolutely.
You could customize everything, and that is really great, because I don't like the snap to next target that I think is popular amongst Call of Duty, right?
Chess, which basically makes playing on hard impossible, because on hard you have to be getting headshots or you are dead. So
right. So I switched that over to free aim, which maybe is why it was a little bit more difficult, perhaps, than for other people. But the fact that you could do all of that quite easily.
Find normal hard, definitely.
Okay, yeah. What about the length of the game?
Well, it's generally described as being too long because people find that it drags. Now, I assume you found this to be the case as well.
Absolutely.
And I did too.
I think it was like 18 hours or something?
No, it took me 12 hours. It was 12 hours, but it felt like about 20. But I don't think that is the correct word to describe the issues with the game, because it started to drag for me probably maybe an hour into the game. I don't know. But very early on. It's not that the game is too long. It's that it lacks any sense of not pacing, because the pacing is all right. The only major problem with the pacing is that I thought was they repeated the favela section. And you weren't doing anything different in the favela the second time through. I thought that was an unnecessary repetition of what you were doing. I thought that was a poor pacing decision. Beyond that, I think the pacing is good. They've got these shootouts, which I thought were really boring and pretty crap, but they've got these light gun style shootouts at the end of some levels that give you a different thing to do, and they do go through a variety of settings nicely. So I think the pacing is good. But
can I guess what you're going to say?
Go on.
I think that in light of games like Tomb Raider, which has added RPG elements to third-person shooters, the problem with this game wasn't the pacing. It was there was no evolution to the gameplay. You never could, there was no feeling that you could upgrade your weapons or upgrade your skills or get better. It was basically the same game that you were playing 30 minutes into it was the same game you were playing after 12 hours.
You could guess that, but you'll be completely wrong. And
am I right?
No, well, I don't think that would have added much to it, given this is much more action orientated than human. I don't think you need to add those things to a game like this to make it work. I don't think you do at all. Here's the issue, though, as far as I see it. As I said, It's not in the pacing, it's in the cadence and rhythm. And by that I mean it's copying the game mechanics of the first two Max Payne titles. It's somewhat copying the structure of the first two games as well. Not the second, actually. It's not copying the second at all. It's copying the structure of the first game, which is basically just a long list of battles that are all basically the same. Now, I think that style of gameplay can work, especially if you've got mechanics as good as they were in the first Max Payne, and if you've got mechanics as good as they are here in Max Payne 3. The issue is, although they've copied the structure of Max Payne 3, although they've copied the overall structure of the first Max Payne, they haven't copied the structure of the individual battles. So in the first Max Payne, every battle you went into was this short, extremely small, cramped, fast, gritty battle. Some of them only lasted maybe 20 seconds. And that would be the end of the battle. Even if you were fighting, 5 people, it could be a 30-second battle. 10 people might take 1 minute to kill. And there were a couple of instances where you might be in a large warehouse area. But even then, the individual battles were all basically at absolute most 2 minutes long. In Max Payne 3, you're in these huge areas fighting many more enemies that results in the battles being significantly longer. A single battle might last, just not even a big one, might last maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes, and immediately following that battle, another big battle is going to begin. Whereas in the first Max Payne, often after an immediate battle, you would move on to a new area, or you might be surprised by maybe 1 or 2 enemies. Here, you're basically moving from one large battle to the next in a constant stream with absolutely no rhythm or cadence to it. I think that really crippled the experience for me.
I think perhaps I always thought that those short missions were a notion of or a result of the technical limitations of the platforms at the time, the PC and whatever. Because, they had the really good use of textures and, that was kind of new. And I just always thought that the size of the environments and the length of the battles were as a result of the technical limitations.
I don't think that's the case, because you look at first-person shooters of the time, or even some third-person shooters like Mafia, which isn't a third-person shooter, but have third-person shooting mechanic in it. I don't think that's the case. I think they chose to do that for the narrative, because I think the settings in both Max Paynes, with some exceptions, were very much based around what they wanted to do within the story. And I think that's the case here as well. But in Max Payne 2, they did alter the gameplay structure drastically, and they could have easily altered the battle style as well. And I think at that time, technology was easily enough advanced, if it wasn't even for the first game, for them to do larger battles. I think that was a deliberate choice. I think it was an important choice, because if you are doing a shooter of that style, I don't think you can do huge battles unless you're going to do it in the style of Doom or maybe Quake, where you're moving extremely quickly through what is a large environment, so that you're basically moving at a much faster pace, which you can't do in a third-person shooter. I think they were very much deliberate choices. And but even if they weren't, they still result in a far better experience. And I think it is a major issue here that there's basically no sense of rhythm or cadence to the overall gameplay. And I think that's what makes it drag much more than it being too long.
Yeah, certainly that's always the case, isn't it? I mean, you can play some games that are 40-hour games and it's not long enough.
Yeah.
I
mean, that's the issue, I think, with criticism. Unless something has, it's 10 hours, great, and then there's 5 hours of filler stuck at the end, then you can say it's too long. That's not the case here at all. So I don't think you can just say it's too long. I think if you want to describe it in one word, I think the best word to describe would be it is too verbose. And I don't think you can describe it any way better than that. Unless you disagree.
I found the game to be completely boring. I mean, the conflict that I had with the game was it looked great, it played well, it had a lot of diversity, I liked the settings, I liked the character, but I just wasn't having any fun with it.
Yeah.
And I racked that up to it just having shallow gameplay. I didn't ever feel I didn't feel any joy as I do in some first and third person shooters where you become a master of a certain weapon.
Yeah.
I didn't have the distraction, as I said in Tomb Raider, of upgrading stuff all the time. I didn't feel like I was getting it stronger or better or more powerful as you would in, say, a Grand Theft Auto as you get more and more tools of the trade. And I just was bored with it.
Yep.
I was basically done with it after the 4 hours, and then it kept going on and on. I think it was eventually, I think my game time on that was something like 16 or 17 hours, and that was about 12 hours too long for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. There's the first Max Payne and the second Max Payne, the gameplay is shallow as well. Well, I would say less the second as well, because of the innovative changes they made to it. But in the first game, the gameplay is shallow. But if you have shallow gameplay, you then rely entirely on the cadence and rhythm of the gameplay to make it enjoyable. And I think they could easily have made this into a really, really fun third-person shooter. Even over, 10 hours or 12 hours, I think it could have worked. But I think, to me, the major issue is that there is no sense of cadence to it at all.
Yep.
Yeah. Which comes from its verbosity. And that also, in a way, applies to the cutscenes, which aren't too long, but also don't really have any momentum to them at all. They're just kind of there. They play for 10 minutes and then they're over. And
it was eye candy. I mean, it was far more visually interesting than it was mentally stimulating.
And it would have benefited so much from the conciseness of comic book style presentation, where you can get through that much information in, a tenth of the time.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty much all there is to say about it. The only other thing is about 1 and 2. I just want to say, because I don't think I mentioned it in any of the previous two, that the music in both those are awesome too. And that's it. And actually, no, we didn't mention about Spec Ops: The Line. Can we quickly say that? Just a couple of moments in it were straight out of it.
Yep. And then a final score.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest moment was at the end of the game. We can go into spoilers. We've been in spoilers the whole time. At the end of the game, where you catch up to the second big bad dude, the Saddam Hussein lookalike, and he's got his leg blown off, and it's... Oh, no, two. We've got to mention this. And so you come across him, and he's dying. He's going to be dead, and you've got the option of either shooting him or not, and it doesn't matter. It affects absolutely nothing except you get an achievement either way. That's very much a Spec Off the Line style decision, and the whole presentation of it. Probably a bit more exploitative than Spec Ops The Line, but very much in a similar vein. And the other scene that comes to line is when Marcelo is getting necklaced. That is very much like the scene in Spec Ops The Line where you're going through the devastation of your phosphorus attack, and you're looking at all the people that have been calcified. That's very much similar to that scene. And once again, I would say that's less exploitative than the Spec Ops The Line scene, but is more stupid, though. I'm not as familiar with calcified people as I am with necklace people, but necklacing is called necklacing for a reason. You don't stick someone in a pile of tires, then pour petrol into the tires and light it. You put a tire around someone's neck as if it was a necklace, and possibly around its chest, but you don't always do that, because you can easily be immobilized from having a petrol-filled tire around your neck, and then you light it, which is obviously going to be a much more torturous death than sticking someone in a tire full of petrol, in a tire pile full of petrol, because not as much heat is going to collect up. So I thought that was, given all their research into everything else to do with the favelas and Brazil, I thought that was a pretty obnoxious thing to present badly, and inaccurately, rather.
I'm glad I pointed that out. Now, I would ask you, where do you think they should take the series from here, but we discussed that about an hour ago.
Yeah, straight to Afghanistan.
And then to Australia and a rental car agency.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
What were you going to say
firm.
about Spec Ops: The Line?
No, just basically that there was a lot of things that were very shocking in Spec Ops: The Line in terms of its depiction of violence, and this game does many of those same things. And it was rather extraordinary that this is a game. Obviously, Rockstar gets to do whatever they want, but it is being published by, probably the number 2 or number 3 publisher in the West right now, Take-Two.
Yep.
Publicly held company. So I know that movie companies get away with this kind of violence without anyone batting an eye. But these were very visual and, could have gotten them into a lot of trouble, given that people like to closely watch what Rockstar does and then exploit that for their own, family party or that sort of thing, type thing.
Okay.
So that was basically the only correlation I drew there. And then, there was some shock value to the organ trading kind of thing.
Which was hilariously fucking dumb.
Yeah.
That whole plot line. Why did that? They didn't even need to include that. That's like a throwback to the conspiracy in Max Payne 1 and 2, which was a load of crap. And clearly, they didn't even want to continue on with that, going by how it was presented in Max Payne 2.
No, it was essentially just writers being bored.
Yeah.
And I think just wanting to titillate themselves, really.
Yeah. And so it's time we give it a score.
Yes.
And
any predictions?
Yes, we have some predictions. We've got, of course, our traditional prediction from Simon of the Go Foo Yourself podcast. He predicted I would give it a 5. Have you got a prediction for me?
I predict that you will give it a 6.5.
Okay. And I'm going to predict you're going to give it a 5 out of 10.
Okay.
So who's going to go first? I'll go first.
Yeah.
Because we've got 2 people predicting my score. I am going to give it a 6. And I think it deserves enough credit to go above being mediocre because of how excellent the mechanics are. I think it deserves to be better than mediocre just for them. I
said you were going to give it a 6.5, right?
Yep. So
and
you were closer than Simon.
Yep. I give the game a 7.5.
Okay, well that's way ahead of what I was expecting. So you're over your. I should have been thinking along those lines because you enjoyed the character Max Payne. So that was a complete stuff up on my part.
I think that this. I give them extra points in this regard, and that is, I think they were going into a thankless task, and having to revive a franchise that they were not responsible for creating. They weren't going to win one way or the other, and they could have, and in retrospect should have, spent a lot less money on this game, and probably have gotten the same result, or better. If they had a smaller team on it, less money spent on it, less money marketing it, lower expectations, hire on a couple of the Remedy guys to hire Sam Lake as a consulting writer, to buy off the fans. Would have been a better strategy for Rockstar. And it was their premier game for that year, and it kind of flopped. So,
except critically, and just one final thing that I thought was pretty damn cool was the depiction of how he was carrying the gun. So it's got the limit of guns, right? Which generally feels like some arbitrary, annoying thing. And, you see a rifle stuck on someone's back, right? Here, of course, you get the rifle stuck on his back, but when he's carrying a rifle and 2 guns, one gun is holstered, the other pistol is carried in the other hand, one hand, on the rifle in the other, which just looks fucking awesome.
Yeah, I always like it when they put the weaponry that you're holding onto the actual character.
Yeah, and was that not one of the most badass character models carrying weapon styles? Yeah,
and they also changed his walking style as well.
That was awesome.
This is what I'm saying, they spent way too much time and money on this game.
And this is the perfect note to end on. I just forgot about it. That fucking ending is one of the stupidest things I've ever seen. It is literally him walking off into the sunset.
Yep.
What the fuck was that?
And they should have had him whistling. Always look on the bright side of life or something. Because he's all happy and good, and he's off to new adventures. Like I said, he's going to get a car in a rental agency.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a new page.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I mean, for Max Payne 6, I think he should be a televangelist. So,
A
we'll get in...
born-again televangelist.
Yeah, Pentecostal televangelist.
Yeah.
And
it turns out, though, that the church is run by the Papal Illuminati conspiracy.
Now, he does some snake handling, but he always has venomous snakes that have been colored to look like dangerous snakes.
Yeah.
But someone, his boss, some sort of priest, takes out an insurance policy on him and sneaks a real snake in with the non-venomous snakes. And from there, the script pretty much writes itself.
Absolutely.
And it's, of course, set in Poland.
No. Part of it's set in Poland, but he goes on a pilgrimage to India to learn from real snake charmers. And what happens is the snake charmer that he learnt from gets murdered by one of these...
A Pakistani.
Yeah, exactly. No, by a Danish person, which is how he ends up in Denmark.
A Danish Pakistani.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's another classic Rockstar plot with Penn there.
That's Max Payne 6.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's it for episode 20, I believe, except...
21.
21, except... I have to say, I watched the Max Payne film, and what the hell has happened to American cinema? This should have been a good B-grade film, despite the fact that it is a video game film. It had a big American star in it, Mark Wahlberg, doing a job he would have not wanted to do. That's perfect B-grade material. It's got a character actor in it, BB, whatever the rest of his name is, and it's got a no-talent woman who's there because she's a sex symbol. She is a shit actor. I see no evidence she can act. She's a good voice actor, Mila Kunis, but an absolutely atrocious actor. And it's got a director who has a flair for visual style. That should be the perfect B-grade film, right? Right?
Yes, sure.
But it was utter shit. And it's not because it's a video game film. It's because American cinema has somehow completely forgotten any principles of cinematography and has become a formless parody of itself and is utter shit.
It's a commercial assembly line, my friend.
But it was a commercial assembly line 10 or 20 years ago. But somehow the programs running the commercial assembly line have received a virus that have fucked up their formulas.
And I can think of no better way than to end our oral review of Max Payne 3.